Ankur, thank you for this conversation with Evan. I must admit, I didn't know what to think in the beginning, where we were headed with this puppeteering. Over the course of this interview, I really enjoyed all of the layers that were sort of peeled off. You know, starting with what is this project he's doing, this platform of TikTok and posting these videos, and kind of his process with that. It's more of like just talking about his technical, artistic process with it, and ending up where you ended up, and talking about his psychedelic journeys and this whole process of healing. You know, that's what's interesting. I mean, that's what's interesting about the interview, is that it's a man's healing in public, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So before we get that, where it's just like, are these therapy puppets? It's like the therapy puppet is so interesting because it's like, in a sense, it's so on the nose. It's almost satire. I mean, it is satire, like in South Park, they're like Mr. Hand. You know, when people think of kind of like funny, like psychotherapy, they think of this stuff. But him doing it in this way, him doing it publicly, and so it's like we talked about in a previous episode. It's like this level of transparency becomes so compelling in and of itself, you know. And to me, this is so interesting because, like, I tend to think of TikTok as a platform that optimizes for just the shittiest drivel on the planet.
Well, and that's because you had that experience with TikTok where you were in that like world of mirrors, right?
Where I was shitty drivel? No.
And people were criticizing you for being so handsome or whatever happened.
Yeah, they were like, this guy's way too good looking for TV. Put him on radio. No, I mean, maybe we could talk about that. That wasn't interesting. I had this uncanny experience with TikTok where I went to a fair, a little town fair, where they had this booth similar to like the Zoltar machine. It was like this booth shrouded in mystery. It had like this purple fabric and like this whole mystique about it. And it said, "Come look in the true mirror." And all of a sudden I remembered this Radiolab episode that featured this guy and this thing, this object, the true mirror. And he was sitting out front. He goes, I said, you know, I remember this from a Radiolab. He says, "That's me." And I go, I got to check this out. So I go in and he's filming me seeing myself in this true mirror. And it's the first time I've ever seen one of these things. The true mirror is this really bizarre sort of uncanny experience where it inverts your reflection so that it's actually the true reflection that people see of you in real life. And his proposition there is that you'll all of a sudden it stops becoming this kind of baffled feedback loop. All of a sudden, like, you're alive and you're engaging with this live image of yourself, and this light all of a sudden like comes into your eyes, and you see what people see. And for me, it was this like beautiful, affirming experience. I was just like, I was so open. I was just like ready to have this. And also I'd been prepared by listening to this Radiolab episode. So I had this whole like experience on camera where I'm just like, oh my God, this is so cool. And everybody on TikTok's like, yeah, right. This guy's stoned. Amazing. Another sucker born every minute. You know, it's just like thousands of comments, but it did go kind of, viral. I had like a couple 100,000 or something like likes. I mean, you look at some pretty girl walking her dog and it has 2 million, but yeah, it had all these comments. But why do we go down that road? I don't think of TikTok as this environment where something like this, someone exploring IFS, internal family systems, doing this journey of self-therapy, will all of a sudden get this huge audience, this viewership where people are following along. And I don't know, to me, that was really the really like encouraging, like affirming part of this conversation.
Yeah. For me too. It's like, okay, as kind of an old guy now, I'm going to play the old guy role.
Yeah.
Like, oh, there's all these things I don't quite understand. People are just like fucking around with technology, just wasting time scrolling on their phones instead of actually interacting. But apparently millions of those people are looking for healing and finding it and finding ways of expressing their emotions or learning about themselves or getting empathy for their experiences, or just looking for techniques that they could improve their lives.
Yeah. And I think the other interesting thing here that's sort of part of his project, and he says this a couple times, because I'm not a psychotherapist, I'm not a specialist. And in a way, these platforms have given rise, so I'll use myself as an example, have given rise to the non-expert, right? And that has a, it's the benefits mixed. On one hand, you get this like pollution of the information space. It's just a bunch of people sounding off as if they're experts on a million things, and we can't quite be sure who to listen to. And on the other hand, you get this incredible, like just exponential plurality of ideas. And in this case, I think it's his discovery, it's his process of healing himself. And he's very clear about not being an expert, right? I think he calls it pure counseling in a sense. He's making this available and he's making it transparent. And people through that are finding healing, are finding something that resonates with them, and then something that they can apply. And it's really just like exactly what we're trying to do with this podcast, right? I mean, we're interviewing people we're interested in. We're sort of in our own process of discovery and exploration constantly, just by virtue of who we are. And we're making that transparent and hoping that our listener can extract something that's beneficial, valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought it up in that way, because it's really inspiring to me. What I really dislike and what I really find myself reacting to in this space is with the non-expert thing, is that everyone is coming on and sharing their opinion as if it matters, as if there was like a lot of wisdom in their opinion, or we should all listen to their opinion, which I think is just not true. But the flip side of that, what I really love about it is when people share their journey and their lived experience, and there's just so much wisdom in that for me. And especially for someone who can resonate with it, can vibrate with it and be like, oh, that reminds me of my journey. But this guy has taken a couple of next steps, and maybe they're interesting to me, or maybe they're not. Or like that's what I really want to get out of this podcast is highlighting people's journeys and kind of what they've learned about their own lives. Because that's where we're all experts. We're all experts in our lived experience, not what we think about Ukraine or COVID or anything like that, because those are not things that most of us are experts about.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Next steps or even adjacent steps. And, maybe it's not the next steps that someone will take. Maybe ketamine therapy is not interesting to all of our listeners. And they're not that interested in the discussion of psychedelics. But just, I think, also getting a sense of what the landscape is, getting these different points of view in the way that you're saying, that's like grounded in the actual experience, and maybe removing that layer of pretense. And I think that I love the way you said that we're all sharing our opinion as if it mattered. And we're all kind of like offering it as if the whole world were just kind of like waiting for our verdict. Here's what I think. Here's what I think about COVID. Proceed. And I love this. I love that we stumbled upon this just sort of in a debrief, because I think it does get to the heart of what we hope to accomplish with this show.
So thank you, Evan, for leading us here.
Thank you, Evan, for leading us here. Exactly. But just by doing what you do, right? Which, by his own admission, is just looking for some relief, looking for a sense of healing, and like addressing his past in this way. I think it's beautiful.
And now I'm going to invoke our new tradition, which is to say, dear listener, we want to hear how this last episode that we're debriefing right now, the episode with Evan, has impacted your life. And so get on to our speak pipe and share that with us.
Sound off.
Yeah, sound off. And I want to air it. I want to air. If you're, powerful and eloquent, you've actually been transformed by this. I want to air it.
You're not just sharing your opinion.
That's right. Yeah. And check the show notes for the URL for how to do that, because spelling out long URLs is it's boring. It's like so 90s.
Right. That's so 90s. What's an example of a URL from the 90s?
AOL.com/
news groups.
Yeah. I don't remember the rest of it.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to this conversation where me and Ankur discover what we're doing on this podcast. And tune back in for many conversations where we continue to discover what we're doing here.
That concludes another episode of the 10,000 Heroes show. Thank you for listening. And as always, we hope it inspires reflection, insight, and lasting personal transformation, my favorite. I also have a special request for you today. As I mentioned at the onset of this podcast, we recently created our first ever listener survey. The idea is to understand the role we play in our listeners' lives to better serve you. I've got lots of guesses as to who's listening and why, but guesses without empirical data are just guesses. So please take the survey. It's only 11 questions, and I'm throwing in a sweet hand-painted watercolor postcard to every survey respondent that I have done myself. So I'll save you reading the whole URL. The link to the survey is in the show notes and on our Twitter, which is 10khshow. Or if you want, you can just email me at info@10kh.show, and I will send it to you personally. As always, we are hungry to hear how this interview has affected your life. If you do anything differently or new, whether it's taking ketamine, making a puppet, or being more vulnerable with your friends, let us know. That's why we created that voice memo feature. That's why we have a Twitter. That's why we read our email. Thank you, and happy listening.